There are a couple of ways you could implement having a table view controller open different information for each row using different views. First, in the table view didSelectRow at index path method, here, you could check to see which row you've selected, and based on the row you could create a different view controller. So instead of creating the book detail view controller every single time, you could create a different detail view controller depending on which row you're in. So that would be one way to do it. I decided to do it a slightly different way by creating a new class called BooksModel, which holds the information that will be in the view depending on which row you select. So the first thing I did was to create a new class, BooksModel, and in this class I added an array to hold the titles of the books here, and an array to hold the names of the images for the books here. The first array, called books, will be used to create the rows in the table view, which is what we used the books array to do previously. So this new books array will be replacing that one. So let's take a look at the implementation file, and you can see the two arrays I'm creating in the init method. Here is the books array with the names of the books, and the images array, the book images array with the names of the images here. When you select a book title from the table view, you'll see a different image depending on which book you selected. So if you select Head First Design Patterns, you'll see hfdp.png, and so on. I added the PNG files to my resources folder. Let's put them in here, and when you click on them, you can actually see the image. So those are the images that will be displayed each time you select a row. They're all stored and managed through this BooksModel class, which has these arrays that hold the data, as well as these methods to get the data, like get number of books, which returns the number of books in the books array, get book title at index, which, given an index, will return the book title at that index from the books array, and get book image at index, which, given an index, will return an image created from the book images array. So it takes the object at the index from book images, which is this array up here, and then creates a UI image from that and returns that image. I chose to create the images in this method, get book image at index, rather than creating them in the array itself, so that I wouldn't have to pre-allocate the memory for all of the images, and rather just create them on the fly when they're needed for the view. So now let's go back to the table view controller and look at the changes that I made for this new model. First, before, in the viewDidLoad method, we had set up an array called the books array, which held the titles of the books, and I'd actually set them up right here in this viewDidLoad method. So what I've commented out that code and replaced it with code to allocate an instance of the BooksModel class and set it using the property, BooksModel property, and of course releasing the temporary object. So that just sets up a link to the BooksModel object. The second change I made was to change the number of rows in section method. So now, instead of using the size of the books array, I'm using the get number of books method on the BooksModel to return the number of books in the array that's being stored in the BooksModel. Next, I changed the cell for row at index path method. So instead of using the books array to get the title of the book, I'm now using the BooksModel and the get book title at index method to get the title of the book. I also noticed when I went to make this change that since I upgraded to 3.0, the cell.text property is deprecated in 3.0, and you now have to go through what is called a cell text label to set the label of the cell. So you have to grab the label, which is a UI label, and then set the text on the cell label using the text property. And then finally, I updated the did select row at index path method. It looks pretty much the same. I've got a couple of new lines of code. First, when I go in to create the book detail view controller, when a row has been selected, do the same thing as I did before, except now we also have to set the books model in the detail view controller. So it has a reference to the books model object to get to the arrays of book titles and book images. We're also now setting the title of the row based on the books model instead of the books array using the get book title at index method. And then I added this new line to call a method on the view controller called set index for book image, which just basically sets the row or passes in the row into the book detail view controller so that it's basically setting the index for the book to show. So it can index into the array of images. And then this part is just the same. It's just basically pushing the view onto the navigation controller to display it. So let's take a quick look at the book detail view nib file, and then we'll jump to the book detail view controller so you can see the changes I made there. The book detail view nib file, I replaced the label that I was displaying before with the same data that we saw every time you clicked on a book. I've replaced that with an image view, which will display the image associated with the book that you clicked on or selected. And the other thing I did was I created a new outlet in the detail view controller called book image view, which I hooked up to this image view. And we'll take a look at the book detail view controller. So I've got the book image view, and I set that up as an outlet. I've got the book's model, and I've got the index that will store the index into the images array so that we know which image to show. And I created a new method, set index for book image, which, as you saw in the table view controller, we call to actually set that index so when we go to display the image in the image view, we know which one to display. So let's take a look at the code. All the changes that I made are right here at the top. I synthesized the two properties and implemented the set index for book image method, which just sets the book index ivar in the object to the index that we pass in, which, if you remember, is the row that we selected that we pass in from the table view controller. And then in the view will appear method, this is where I actually set the image for the image view. So the book image view is a UI image view. That's the element we're using in the nib file, and we use the .image property to actually set which image to display. And of course we get the image to display from the books model by using the get book image at index method, passing in the book index, which we set up here in set index for book image, pass that in, and it uses that index to get the image from the book images array in the books model object. And that's it. That's all we have to do. So let's run it and see what happens. So now when you click on a book, you see the image associated with that book. You get a different image depending on which row you select, which book you select, which is exactly what we wanted. A different view. It's using the same underlying view object, but it's displaying different information depending on which book you select. So I hope that answers your questions, and let me know your feedback about this screencast in the comments. Thank you.